building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। हुजूर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के इस सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। रिलायंस, नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Welcome to the world of Tata Steel, a flagship company of the global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of the world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Nusserwanji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that would compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus in Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global steel companies in the world. In 2015, Tata Steel set up a state-of-the-art integrated steel plant at Kalinganagar, Odisha in India. The Phase 2 expansion of Kalinganagar steel plant from 3 million TPA to 8 million TPA is currently underway. The company is all set to pursue domestic growth with its acquisition of Bhushan Steel Limited and the steel business of Usha Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company is mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर, ताकत लंबी पारी खेलने की, परफेक्ट फिट, क्वालिटी टेस्ट, मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। तो बस ले आइए JSW कलर ऑन प्लस की छत, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। JSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
JSW न्यू स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है।
सरिया दिखता कहाँ है?
ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
चेस्ट गार्ड है, दिखता कहाँ है?
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये देना। JSW न्यू स्टील TMT बार, प्योर स्टील, मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत JSW सीमेंट के साथ। JSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस।
कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं। जो तेरा वो मेरा, और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार JSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। JSW पेंट्स, थिंक ब्यूटीफुल।
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Our today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. About building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा, नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के इस सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। रिलायंस, नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Welcome to the world of Tata Steel, a flagship company of the global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of the world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Nusserwanji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that would compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus in Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global steel companies in the world. In 2015, Tata Steel set up a state-of-the-art integrated steel plant at Kalinganagar, Odisha in India. The Phase 2 expansion of Kalinganagar steel plant from 3 million TPA to 8 million TPA is currently underway. The company is all set to pursue domestic growth with its acquisition of Bhushan Steel Limited and the steel business of Usha Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company has mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर, ताकत लंबी पारी खेलने की, परफेक्ट फिट, क्वालिटी टेस्ट, मैथ से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। तो बस ले आइए GSW कलर ऑन प्लस किचन, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। GSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
JSW नियो स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है।
सरिया दिखता कहाँ है?
ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
चेस्ट गार्ड है, दिखता कहाँ है?
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये देना। JSW नियो स्टील TMT बार, प्योर स्टील, मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत JSW सीमेंट के साथ। JSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस।
कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं। जो तेरा वो मेरा, और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार JSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। JSW पेंट्स, थिंक ब्यूटीफुल।
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are a $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. Is about building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। हुजूर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के इस सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। रिलायंस, नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Welcome to the world of Tata Steel, a flagship company of the global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Nusserwanji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that would compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus in Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company has mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर, ताकत लंबी पारी खेलने की, परफेक्ट फिट, क्वालिटी टेस्ट। मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। तो बस ले आइए GSW कलर ऑन प्लस की छत, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। GSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
GSW नियो स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है।
सरिया दिखता कहाँ है?
ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
चेस्ट गार्ड है, दिखता कहाँ है?
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये देना JSW नियो स्टील TMT बार, प्योर स्टील मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत JSW सीमेंट के साथ। JSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस।
कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं। जो तेरा वो मेरा और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार JSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। JSW पेंट्स, थिंक ब्यूटीफुल।
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are $100 billion global enterprise. has been built on enduring values. Our today is about delivering excellence across business sectors.
For the minister for a couple of minutes, or we should commence?
Considering I'm a panelist myself, I think you're putting me in an awkward situation. But I'm wondering how I'm going to diplomatically respond to this one.
That was absolutely correct.
Yeah, that's not a good way. I mean, you put me on the back foot before I began my presentation. So I'm watching cricket. For those of you in Brussels and elsewhere who are not at the back foot.
I can't hear you, Kavita.
I'm saying, would you like to start with the session?
Whatever you recommend the protocol says, I'm not familiar with that.
I think you can start.
Okay.
Because the minister is busy, he'll join in a little. Yeah.
All right, fine. So everybody, welcome to the session on the European Union-India Strategic Partnership in a Realigned Global Order. I'm going to take a moment to just introduce all the panelists. There's, of course, Mr. Hardeep Singh Puri, who's the Minister of Civil Aviation, 3 ministries actually, Housing and Urban Affairs, and the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry of the Government of India. He will be joining us shortly. So in the meantime, we are commencing. Mr. Bernd Lange, Member of the European Parliament and Chair of the International Trade Committee of the European Parliament, Brussels. Mr. Marcus Behrer, Director General and CEO, Business Europe, who's based out of Belgium. Mr. Rahul Chhabra, Secretary, Economic Relations, Ministry of External Affairs, the Government of India. Mr. Christian Hirte, Member of Parliament from Germany. Ms. Helena Koenig, the Deputy Director General, Trade, European Commission, Brussels, Belgium. So good afternoon to all of you from Europe, and a good evening to all of those from India. A very warm welcome to all the dignitaries and the audience at the CII Partnership Summit 2020. This Partnership Summit is very special indeed, as it coincides with CII's 125 years of existence. So it is very special for us. The Partnership Summit has a special place in CII's history, as it has been one of the flagship events of CII since its inception, since it was conceived in 1995, which was CII's centenary year. The summit has hosted many global leaders and has been witness to several important collaborations that has greatly enhanced global economic and trade relationships. The Indian industry is grateful to Sri Hardeep Singh Puri for his dynamic leadership always, especially in the current crisis. His leadership and sustained efforts to boost exports, to enhance our trade partnerships and industry-friendly policies show his commitment to the country and to the industry at large. Friends, it is needless to say that due to COVID, the year 2020 will not be erased in our memory for a long, long time. Adapting to the new normal would require new systems, policies, partnerships, and opportunities will get reflected. Amidst all these, we must preserve that which has already a very strong foundation. And the India-European Union partnership is one such example. These two partners are key players in a rapidly shifting world axis with shared agendas that can shape future geopolitical politics and dynamics. India's export to the EU countries in 2019-20 stood at $54 billion, while imports recorded $52 billion. Trade is evenly balanced, and the EU is one of India's largest markets for exports and services as well. The India-EU bilateral trade and investment agreement is an area of concern, and this partnership that needs to be addressed. India and the EU started negotiating a comprehensive free trade agreement covering goods, services, and investment as far back as 2007. Even after several rounds of negotiations held until 2013, the negotiations could not be completed as serious differences remained over issues like tariff cuts in automobiles, wines and spirits, procurement, market opening, and movement of professionals. The two parties have had a series of stock-taking meetings at senior officials levels over the years to work out the modalities for resuming the negotiations. Indian industry looks forward to the finalization of the BTIA at the earliest. Let me briefly take you through the areas in which the India-EU partnership could be strengthened. The first is healthcare. It's quite obvious given the times that we live in. The COVID pandemic has put healthcare as the topmost priority for all countries. Mutual synergies in the field of healthcare through shared capabilities, experiences, and strength in production and development of pharmaceuticals and vaccines, healthcare research and development, diagnostics and treatment could be strengthened. The second is trade and investments. The economies must work towards further developing trade and investment relations to unleash the full potential, particularly in the context of post-COVID economic recovery, and support sustainable growth and jobs on both sides. Work needs to be done for creating balanced, ambitious, and mutually beneficial trade and investment agreements, opening markets and creating a level playing field on both sides again. The third is sustainable modernization partnership. As outlined in the roadmap document of the India-EU July Summit, we may enhance the India-EU partnership through a wide range of cooperation tools and activities, including through financial and technical assistance, consistent with and in pursuance of respective obligations and responsibilities under major international agreements, such as UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, as well as the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. Other areas of cooperation could include climate change, clean energy, environment, urban development, information and communications technology, research and innovation, amongst others. As we look forward to economic recovery and a substantial pickup in economic activities, let us come together and find newer and innovative areas of forging partnerships so that we can help lead the world out of this present crisis. So these were my opening remarks in the hope to set the stage for the conversation as it will proceed. I will just briefly take you through the order in which I would request you all to speak after my introduction. Helena will come after this. Mr. Christian Herte will follow. Mr. Rahul Chhabra then, Mr. Berer, Mr. Bernard Lange, and then Mr. Hardeep Singh will give a special address. So quickly, Helena, to introduce Ms. Koenig, she works in the European Commission's Directorate General as Director General for Trade, where she's currently the Deputy Director General responsible for bilateral relations with Asia, Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific. Services and digital trade. It's a pretty long. I'm reading this out, Ms. Koenig, so if I am a little off in terms of the grammar, please forgive me. She has a very wide brief. Services, digital trade, investment, intellectual property, and trade and sustainable development. So with that, I request you, Ms. Koenig, to just give us your opening remarks, and then we will, of course, after this session of opening remarks and statements by everybody, we'll go into a Q&A. So the floor is yours, Ms. Koenig.
Thank you very much. And that was a good pointer for actually making my biography a bit shorter and more easily presented. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here today to speak at an event which is organized by CII Indian Industry, because it is obviously very, very important to hear your voices and your views on how we can enhance cooperation between India and the EU in the field of trade and investment. As the chair for this session already says, we do, even India shares a lot of values and interest. It's the core of our strategic partnership, which, as was mentioned, leaders agreed to further strengthen at the July Leaders Summit this year. Look at it, our partnership and cooperation ranges from climate change and digital economy, which of course is two of the core items for this commission and also a core thing for India, but also, of course, environment and peace and security. Turning then to trade and investment, which of course is another very important element of our strategic partnership. As was mentioned, we do have a trade in goods and services that is more than 100 billion euros already. Nevertheless, there is, and I think both sides is in full agreement on that, there is a big untapped potential, both when it comes to trade and when it comes to investments. In particular, if I turn to investments, where we can see, even though EU is a very important investor in India, the stock of our foreign direct investments in Brazil, just to take one example, is actually 5 times greater than the stock we have with India. So just to illustrate how much we actually could increase those exchanges. And I think investment is particularly interesting as we now come to the relaunch, so to say, of economies post-COVID. We know that we want to bring investors closer to their markets, and hence bringing bilateral investment to a greater level will be very important. What was also pointed out by our chair for this session is that we have a balanced trade relationships. It's an example of the complementarity of the Indian economy and the EU economy. So we don't have trade deficit as we have with a number of other big partners. And therefore, it's a good starting point to increase also bilateral trade in both services and goods. But of course, the natural question arises, how can we actually untap this growth potential? And I think one key thing really at this point in time is to focus on what is doable and what makes economic sense for our businesses, but also for citizens on both sides. And let me go down on 2 avenues. The first avenue is, of course, the World Trade Organization, which is the basis for the rules we have for international trade today. It is a joint responsibility for India and for the EU and other actors to make sure that we have a functioning World Trade Organization and one that is able to the new challenges that has come up. Not only this last year, we've had a number of them, as we know, but also in the last couple of years, where the WTO, which has not been able to reform to the set that is needed for us to continue and take the maximum benefit of the rules there. The EU and India work very closely to build the WTO. And now I think we need both to take our responsibility and engage even more to make sure that we have a framework that will enable us to face the global challenges. Health was mentioned. It is, of course, extremely important, but also the digital economy, as I mentioned before. From the EU side, we have been launched an important trade and health initiative in WTO, which we will further discuss in the next year. But there's no doubt all sides, and that goes for the EU, that goes for India and other big actors. We need to put much more energy into finding solutions and new initiatives so we really can reform the WTO, so all of our traders and investors can continue to rely on these multilateral rules. Turning then to the bilateral level, and our chair mentioned already that we started negotiations already in 2007. And since 2013, when they were paused, we have, as you all probably are aware, had regular discussions on the possibilities to restart these negotiations. And I've been very closely involved in them myself also. There's no denying on both sides that there would be advantages with the trade and investment agreement. in order to benefit from the growth potential that is there. But at the same time, what we have seen over the last years is that we still haven't reached a meeting of minds and ambitions on what should be included in that trade agreement. And one thing I think we have learned from our side the hard way is that if we don't have these shared ambitions from the beginning, it will take too long time to get an agreement over the finishing line if we even get there. So I think there is a lot of work to be done to make sure that we can arrive at a comprehensive agreement that fully integrates the challenges we are facing today in this world, whether it's climate change, protection of the environment, the digital agenda, but of course also market access for goods and services. And I want to highlight that these elements are not just good to have. I think they're essential elements for a modern trade agreement. And you will see that those are included in agreements we've concluded lately. And also, of course, we need these different topics included to be able to get the support from our member states and from the European Parliament. It is very crucial. However, let me point out also that a trade agreement is not the only way to progress on trade and investment and have increased cooperation. There are plenty of examples where we've actually have reinforced our relationships very much, even though we don't have an FTA in place, as is the case with some of our other main partners. We have had a discussion also on the possibility of having an investment protection agreement with India. There is still no meeting of minds of that on that either. But again, it's one area where we have identified, not that we're totally aligned, but there is a possibility because there are a number of similarities. We both want to increase investments. We both want to reform part of the investment protection framework. And we still think that that would be an interesting avenue to go down, also to support Indian policies of attracting more investments and indeed attracting more Indian investments to the European Union. But I think one of the very important things that came out from our summit last summer was agreement to have a regular ministerial dialogue on trade and investment. And I think that is something which we have been lacking between the EU and India. And I think establishing these platforms to be able to put more impetus and give guidance to areas we could explore and we should explore to strengthen this relationship is really something that we look forward to. We're looking forward to the first meeting, which should be chaired by Minister Goyal from the Indian side, and the Executive Vice President Dombrovskis on the EU side. Hopefully this will take place already in January and will indeed be able to set the stage for a summit that should take place later next year. I think what both leaders in the case of trade and investment will look at this meeting is to see what is it we can put in place to make sure that we're putting on a good path for progress in the next year and years to come. There's a large potential, and I'm sure all of us will benefit from the guidance from that meeting. So if I just wrap up there, I'm convinced that the EU and India strategic partners will be able to find a way to forward our trade and investments partnership through both cooperation in the multilateral fora and on the bilateral level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Koenig. We will come back to Q&A, as I said, later. I'd now like to introduce Mr. Christian Hirte, who's a formidable legal background, and he's a member of parliament of the German Bundestag now since 2008. So, Mr. Hirte, can I request you to just give us your comments? And in the meantime, Mr. Hardeep Singh Puri has joined us. Welcome, Mr. Minister. We'll come to you for the special address. Mr. Hirte?
Yes, thanks. Dear Atul Kunsh, dear Hardeep Singh Puri, dear guests, and honored and distinguished parliamentarians, speakers, and hosts from CII. Thanks a lot for invitation to this event. It's always a pleasure for me to speak with Indian counterparts and exchange on current topics and ideas. Germany has a strong cooperation and partnership with India. Probably you know that Germany has only with a handful of countries intergovernmental cooperations and consultations. And one of these very few countries is India. And therefore, there is a strong basis and partnership to push forward our cooperation. I traveled to New Delhi the last time in February this year, short before the COVID-19 pandemic breakout, and therefore it was my last trip abroad this year. I'm engaged in the Indo-German cooperation for a couple of years, and that's why I'm very happy to join in here today. Geographically, we, Germany and Europe and the Indo-Pacific region seems far apart. However, when it comes to social, political, or economic developments in our networked reality, this geographical distance is no longer as relevant as it was in the past. From a global perspective, the region has a young, well-educated population and can look back on decades of considerable economic growth. The region now accounts for almost 40% of global GDP. With the rise of Asia, the region is also gaining an economic and political importance. At the same time, the strategic competition for influence in the region is increasing, and it is my firm conviction that the Indo-Pacific region is becoming the key to shaping the international order in the 21st century. With China, Japan, and the US, the world's three largest economies have Pacific coastlines. India, on the other hand, is also an Indo-Pacific power and could become number 4 within a very short period. The German government is now settling out the course for its future policy on the countries of the region and adopted in September this year policy guidelines on the Indo-Pacific region. These policy guidelines are intended to identify points of opportunities for cooperation with partners in the region, looking at India, and to contribute to a future overall EU strategy. For me personally, 3 key points stands out. First, peace and security. The Indo-Pacific region is home to 3 nuclear powers, China, India, and Pakistan, as well as North Korea with a nuclear weapons program. It also includes the US and Russia with Pacific coastlines, and France and the UK with Indo-Pacific territories. In addition to increasing geopolitical tensions and open rivalries between powers, there are numerous disputed boundaries, smoldering internal and cross-border conflicts with significant refugee movements, and networks of regional and international terrorism that can clearly have a negative impact on global stability and our interests in the region. It is therefore imminent that we strengthen multilateral fora and the dialogue in the region as to ensure peace and security. Secondly, open shipping routes. The prosperity of our society depends on open shipping routes, physical and digital connectivity, and participation in functioning growth markets. A new bipolarity with new dividing lines across the Indo-Pacific world would undermine these interests. I strongly support the need to further diversify our relations with the region. 90% of the world's foreign trade is conducted by sea, a large part of which via the Indian and Pacific Oceans. More than 2,000 ships per day transport goods between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea via this bottleneck. This means for us that a serious disruption to these maritime trade routes will directly affect the supply chains to and from Europe, and will have serious consequences for the prosperity and supply of our population. That's why we in Germany increasingly understand the need to protect these shipping routes. Freedom of navigation will be one of the key issues in the 21st century, and there are a lot of discussions now in Germany to take on a bigger role in this regard. Third, open markets and free trade. The share of the countries in South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, as well as Australia and New Zealand in Germany's trade in goods has risen steadily in recent decades and now amounts to over 20%. Direct investments in the region have, for years now, been growing disproportionately in relation to total German foreign investment. In view of this great potential, Germany has a vital interest in open markets in the region. I strongly believe that rules-based free trade enhances prosperity on both sides. Ms. Helena König just told us that before. We need to make an effort to strengthen the multilateral trading system with the WTO at its centers through reforms, as well as inclusive and sustainable free trade agreements in the Indo-Pacific region with the EU. The shifting of geopolitical power structures in the Indo-Pacific have direct impacts on us in Germany. This is why we need to work on this clearly within the next years to come. Germany is making an active contribution to shaping the international order in the Indo-Pacific. The COVID-19 pandemic has upended many things in the world and has called old certainties into question. At the same time, the pandemic has reinforced trends that were already apart beforehand. We have a strong interest in promoting multilateral approaches in the region and strengthening the ASEAN with multilateral rules-based systems in which Germany would like to cooperate more closely in the future. All these global challenges can only be overcome by our countries working together. We all know that India's economy is expected to grow rapidly in the future. Germany supports India's efforts to implement reforms and remove barriers to investment, and it's strongly campaigning for a resumption of negotiations between India and the EU on a comprehensive and ambitious free trade agreement. There are rumors that the European Commission has made a political decision in principle to conclude the investment agreement with China. And on my point of view, it would be not a good signal if the EU and India don't move ahead while China is doing. And there should be more push on this important issue in the EU and India as well. The aim must also be to avoid unilateral dependencies by diversifying partnerships. I'm sure my European colleagues on this panel can say more to this topic. Let me conclude. Germany supports the expansion of Europe's engagement in the region and is seeking to coordinate its efforts closely with its European partners. Germany's policy guidelines for the Indo-Pacific are forward-looking, and I hope that they will stimulate the discussion in the political arena and towards our partners. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our discussions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hirte. I would now like to introduce Mr. Rahul Chhabra, Secretary, Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs Government. Mr. Chhabra, before he took on his current post, was High Commissioner to Kenya, Ambassador to Somalia, Permanent Representative to the United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP, the United Nations Human Settlements Programme, UN Habitat, based in Nairobi from 2018 to 20, Ambassador to Hungary and Bosnia and Herzegovina from August 2015 to 18. At the headquarters, he's worked as Joint Secretary Central Europe. He conceived and organized the first two editions of the India Central Europe Business Forum, which has now become a regular feature in the Indian business calendar. During his assignment, he was instrumental in focusing India's foreign policy towards the Arctic and the B4 as well. So with that introduction, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Chhabra for his comments, his opening remarks. You're on mute, sir. You're on mute.
It's okay? Yeah. Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. Just begin by congratulating CII for the 125th anniversary. very special event. It's really playing a critical role in bringing businesses together and in this promoting India's economic growth. What a time to have this sort of summit. If ever there was a black swan event, well, we have seen it happening, and we are having the summit right in the middle of that. So really good time to sort of examine where we are. This event has really upended the world as we know it. It has exposed the vulnerabilities of the hyper-globalized world, as well as highlighted the capacity gap of the existing multilateral institutions to address the challenges that are being confronted. So in this context, really critical that India-EU strategic partnership is really on track. I've had the privilege of serving in European capitals for over a decade, starting with Brussels in the late 80s, Paris in the 90s, and recently, as you said, Budapest, a new member of the EU, and where I was ambassador to Bosnia and Herzegovina, also an aspiring member. So I've seen it up close, the India-EU relationship. But so it's not just the COVID-19 pandemic that has sort of brought this into relevance. I mean, it was referred to by some of the earlier speakers, the rise of China, the relative withdrawal of the United States, underperformance of multilateral institutions, and Brexit. I mean, just to name a few, which is really providing a new context and India-EU coming closer together. But what brings it even more special is what the shared values of democracy, freedom, rule of law that really provide us with a robust platform for India to cooperate in this world. And then we emerge as like-minded, stable, democratic poles in a multipolar world. Some would seem to sort of, say that these commonalities are really not that important. But when you're facing a world of this nature, they create a certain comfort level when you interact with people who are on the same sort of wavelength. They really provide the underpinning for our shared commitment to a world based on rules-based international order and form the foundation of our partnership. We converge on several areas like terrorism, climate change, digital economy. Talking about the potential, with 22% of the population, both of us together, and a similar amount, 22% of GDP, I mean, really, it shows that what we come, the sort of where we converge can really help to shape global outcomes. So as now EU looks beyond its immediate neighborhood and pursues strategic autonomy, India emerges as a natural partner for the EU in this post-COVID world for achieving its objectives and ambitions in the areas of climate change, SDGs, digital technologies. Looking at it from an Indian perspective, the EU is a region full of capabilities, resources, best practices, technologies. We are keen to conclude migration and mobility agreements also with individual countries. So for a more ambitious India, the EU is really a natural partner. This was brought out in the recently referred to 15th India-EU virtual summit that was held in Portugal, by Portugal, where we talked about significant progress in almost all areas. I'll list out a few. The newer areas first, which were talked about in that summit: maritime security, artificial intelligence, circular economy, connectivity in the Indo-Pacific. The immense possibilities that still remain in the areas that we have been working together on: digital domain, norm setting, reform multilateralism, healthcare and climate action. Healthcare and climate was also referred to by Mr. Punj right up in the beginning. Our ambition to cooperate has really been encapsulated in the roadmap, 5-year roadmap that we signed in the India-EU roadmap at that virtual summit just a few months back. Regarding the economic engagement, I think Madame Elena covered a lot of figures in that, so I won't have to go over that. But really, the importance has come about with the need to diversify the global supply chains and to make progress on the trade and investment agreements, for which we have set up the ministerial level trade and investment dialogue group, which was again referred to by Madame Elena. So I'll move on quickly to the next part, which I wanted to mention, that how it's not just a matter of chance that EU-India relationship has come up to this sort of level. We have made a conscious effort towards it. Just to give you some figures, Prime Minister Modi has visited Europe 16 times in the last 6 years. 4 of the 9 virtual summits during the COVID period have been with the EU and its member states. Our External Affairs Minister has spoken to close to 20 of his EU counterparts during the same period. So India's ambition for this relationship has really been matched by the actions on the ground. So as we continue to engage with the EU, we are also developing new convergences. For instance, which was referred to by MEP Christian Herte, the Indo-Pacific. We are glad to see that Germany, France, the Netherlands have come up with their own Indo-Pacific policy papers and guidelines. The European Commission has also expressed its interest in cooperating with like-minded nations in the region in its new EU-US Agenda for Global Change document. So India would like to see a more of a strategic EU in Asia and the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-EU strategic partnership is also significant in the last field that I wanted to refer to, is the reformed and effective multilateralism, which is really a more enlightened, responsive, inclusive, and what's more important, a non-transactional approach to the entire issue. So whereas multilateralism really lies at the very core of EU's identity, and we are looking at strengthening it in terms of, we are already collaborating with existing, with the individual member states like France and Germany, and we already have this issue through the alliance of multiculturalism that we have with France and Germany. So this enormous challenge that lies ahead is to translate actually the potential of the relationship, these shared convergences that I spoke about, and the good intent into really substantive cooperation. So we welcome Portugal's decision to place EU's relationship with India at its foremost priority under its presidency of the Council of the EU, that's beginning in a few weeks from now, January 2021. It has also expressed its interest to organize the India-EU plus 27 leaders meeting next year. So this is really a strong manifestation of the two sides' willingness to foster a stronger India-EU strategic partnership in a post-COVID world. This reflects the belief that India and EU together can contribute enormously towards global peace and prosperity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chhabra. I'd like to now introduce Mr. Marcus de Berer. He's the Director General of Business Europe, based out of Brussels, Belgium. Prior to this, he held positions of CEO at the Austrian Industry Holdings as Director General of the Federation of Austrian Industries and Director for Economic Affairs of the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber. He served as Chief Economic Advisor to the Federal Chancellor of the Republic of Austria, Dr. Wolfgang Schussel. In the 90s, he worked on Australia's accession to the EU and the integration of Austria into the European single market. With that introduction, I'll leave the floor to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Atal Punch. And let me start, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, by thank our partners from CII, first for inviting us, second for organizing this important event, and third, of course, congratulations for your anniversary. Only last year, we have been your guests in Delhi for the Global Business Coalition in 2019. And it was a great event, and it feels like in a different life. Even so, this has only been last year. A lot of things have changed. Meanwhile, what has not changed is, of course, there is enormous opportunities in the mutual relationship between the EU and India. And I would say the pandemic has even emphasized these opportunities. I will refrain as well to go into statistics. They have been mentioned very well by Mrs. Koenig. Just to underline that the figures are significant and impressive, and they underline how important our relationship is and how important this dialogue is. I will try to focus on 3 points. First, where do we see alignment between Europe and India? Second, what is the outcomes that we should strive for? So what is the things we should aim for? And third, what do we think we will need to achieve these three outcomes? So where do Europe and India align? And has been said already, well, we are in an international situation that is not easy for Indian companies and for European companies. We have the pandemic, we have the economic headwinds, we have a tense geopolitical environment. And of course, we have the challenges to the global governance and the crisis of multilateralism, and this all concerns us. I think that both Europe and India support rules-based trade, as has also been mentioned before. We both promote connectivity and sustainable development. And as Mr. Chhabra already said, we are natural partners in many fields, including, of course, achieving our climate and clean energy ambitions. And therefore, there's a lot of logic in this partnership. And of course, needless to say that amongst the largest democracy in the world and the largest democratic region in the world, there's additional points we have in common, and there's a logic of cooperation. And has been said before, a lot of these aspects became visible in this EU-India Strategic Partnership Roadmap to 2025 of last July, which we very much welcome. Of course, there's also differences in view. I mean, this goes without saying, but with the plenty things we have in common and with common priorities, we should be able to achieve a lot together. So what do we think we can achieve together? And I think it's not a surprise that my point of view is we should foremost focus on economic outcomes, because we know that our economies are currently facing important headwinds due to COVID. And we need to focus on economic recovery and how we can achieve this together and can mutually support us. And there's 4 points I wanted to mention. So first, I think we need together to stand up for rules-based trade and against trade restrictive measures. And we know the pandemic, like the last crisis we had, the financial crisis in 2008, has brought along a lot of new trade restrictive measures. And I think we have a joint interest to oppose this protectionism because it's slowing down our economic recovery, and has also been mentioned by a couple of colleagues. We also need, in order to achieve this, to update the rule book of the WTO. And just to mention, other aspects have been mentioned, just to mention a possible agreement on e-commerce. I mean, but we have talked about health and other points. All this we think will be necessary to bring the WTO rule book to the 21st century. Second, we need to focus on investment facilitation and investment protection. India is a large market with potential, and Europe is a net capital exporter. And we see now, with the debates we have on smart technological sovereignty and so on, that a lot of companies are considering ways in how to make their supply chains more resilient, and partly by relocation, but a lot by diversification. And I think in this process, there can lie major opportunities, certainly for India. Third, we should intensify our cooperation on connectivity. And we have heard about a couple of aspects of connectivity. Mr. Hirte has mentioned a lot of them. So the hard and the soft infrastructure that make our economies run. Again, we see major opportunities here. We think India has major needs in these fields, and European companies have a lot to offer. And maybe to see it from a different perspective, I think one can say that the European Union, after all, in itself, is a major connectivity project. So therefore, we have some experience here. And ultimately, as a fourth point, I would like to mention that we should find ways to improve and increase market access for our companies, for our products, and for our services. This is without any doubt the surest way to raise our economic potential. And ultimately, I believe that we should also not lose sight on a free trade agreement between EU and India. As has been mentioned, maybe not tomorrow for sure, but we should keep this as a vision. So what do we need to achieve these outcomes? And let me reverse the order of the 4 points I mentioned and comment a little bit on this. So the reason why I mentioned the free trade negotiations last, and this has been rightly underlined by Helena König, is that EU and India have been trying since a while, since 2007, and for the time being, we were not able to at least agree on the joint ambition. On the other hand, we should not lose hope. We negotiated 20 years with our friends in South America, with Mercosur. We finally reached an agreement. Of course, we still need to ratify, but we reached an agreement after 20 years. So it's worth the effort, and it will not be easy. But we think we should have the FTA negotiations. We should not lose sight of this, and we should keep this as an ultimate goal. In the meantime, of course, we should fully use this newly announced high-level economic and trade dialogue to address existing market barriers and to enhance our potential of economic cooperation. The third point I mentioned, and therefore the second point now, is the connectivity. And you know that the EU has recently launched its own strategy on connectivity, and it would be great if we could find joint ways, the EU and India, to identify projects and bring companies and also funding together, and to involve India in this connectivity strategy. The third point brings me back to investment facilitation and protection. And we firmly believe that we should negotiate an investment protection agreement. And we all know that until recently, many European companies had bilateral investment treaties with India. And we very much regret that these were cancelled. And we think it's an important signal to European companies to renegotiate an agreement between the EU and India. This is important to demonstrate to European companies that they are welcome in India and to use the potential. But we also encourage India to continue to take steps in improving its business environment. We are very much aware that India has risen in the ease of doing business index, and this is highly welcome. But of course, we know that under these difficult economic circumstances we all are faced with, it will be very important to keep this momentum. And lastly, to end with the first point I've mentioned before, the need for EU and India to stand up in defense of rules-based trade. And God knows we are not always on the same page when it comes to difficult debates in the WTO. But I think what unites us and should unite us is that without the WTO, we would all, specifically the EU and India, be worse off. So I think it's for EU and India to think a bit about, do we want to be decision makers or decision takers? And I think the better we manage to align on a couple of points to bring the multilateral trading system forward and to revive the WTO, the better it will be for us, because otherwise it will be rather to the benefits of China and up to a certain extent also to the US, which might impose their priorities on others. So concluding, and let me conclude by saying, there is a very high rationale for greater engagement at this point. We hope that these opportunities will be seized by politicians and also business leaders. We thank the CII once again for having this important conference at this important moment. And we as European business community stand ready to support this process in whatever way we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berer. I'd like to introduce Mr. Bernd Lange, who's a member of the European Parliament and chair of the International Trade Committee of the European Parliament based out of Brussels, Belgium. Mr. Lange.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to CII for the invitation, also for the invitation to the President of the European Parliament, who was unfortunately not able to join this meeting for today. But nevertheless, I think it's a quite right choice to invite the European Parliament, because the European Parliament is the body inside the European Union which has to ratify any trade agreement. And because of that, we are really deeply involved in the negotiation process and the ratification process of each trade agreement. At the moment, I'm really deeply involved, for example, in the negotiation with the United Kingdom, and I hope that we will get an agreement today or tomorrow, so that we will have a proper agreement in force starting the 1st of January. So this is, of course, the duty of the Parliament, and we are really trying to make agreements favorable for the people on the ground, specifically regarding sustainable development and, of course, also labor rights. Me personally, I was really engaged in the negotiation with Vietnam on the ratification of 3 missing ILO core labor convention and a binding implementation plan. And indeed, at the end of the day, we agreed on such a plan. So therefore, the European Parliament is playing an important role in the whole picture of strengthening trade relations, and that there's a need for strengthening the trade relations between the European Union and India. It's obvious, and a lot of the previous speaker mentioned it, and also mentioned the figures. I will not repeat them. Ms. Koenig made it quite clear. But there are untapped possibilities, and we should really look to that, and also try to unlock the negotiation process which started in 2007. And I think we should really look on items where we perhaps can find some common ground. So there is, of course, firstly, the question of the multilateral system. As my previous speaker, Mr. Breyer, mentioned quite clearly, that protectionism is not the solution of the challenges we are faced with. To find a proper answer to climate change, to fight against poverty, to strengthen sustainability in the world, we need a multilateral approach. And therefore, my first point would be really strengthening the WTO, trying to bring our experience in especially the possibilities of bringing the SDGs into the WTO. There will be some discussions. Unfortunately, I guess the next ministerial conference will postpone until the end of the year, but it's clear that there will be some kinds of discussion on SDGs into WTO. And of course, we need also modernization of the rule book. The e-commerce was mentioned. I think that's also a bridge building item between developing countries and industrialized countries. And of course, the question of green goods initiative is also a bridge building block. And unfortunately, there's at the moment no really deep involvement in WTO, but the extension of the green goods, even to perhaps to green services, would make also some steps in the direction to fight against climate change in the frame of WTO. So there are a lot of elements where we can discuss common possibilities to strengthen the multilateral trading system. Secondly, and this was also mentioned a little bit by Christian Hirte, the question of the strategic cooperation in the Indo-Asian area. I think, yeah, we noted the decision of India quite well to withdraw from the recent signed Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Even we understood the refusal by India. It is a signal. And perhaps we should really discuss how we can strengthen the strategic cooperation in this region. And of course, the big elephant in the room was mentioned, China. And at the moment, it's clear that the trade with goods with China is 7 times larger than the trade with India, and in the trade with services 3 times larger. And therefore, we should reflect how to perhaps improve our trading relations and what impact this will have on the situation in the Indian Asian area. So the discussion on the strategic cooperation. Thirdly, the investment protection system. So I can understand that India terminated some bilateral investment treaties with dozens of countries, also a lot of EU member states, because the European Parliament has also a quite critical view on the old-fashioned investment agreements with the ISDS system in. Even we are discussing at the moment the investment protection system in the Energy Charter, where also this old-fashioned dispute settlement mechanism ISDS is in. And this is not in line with our approach for public court system as a solution for disputes on investment cases. And therefore, the dialogue, which kind of investment protection might be the investment protection for the future, is also an area where we can perhaps find common solutions. So as you know, we introduced in the agreement with Canada the ICS, the investment court system, and we are arguing for a multilateral court system that is really overcoming the private arbitration we had so far. And fourthly, yeah, the bilateral ones. Helena König mentioned this as well. There are some really problems on the high tariffs on goods, dairy products, beverage, cars and cars parts, no doubt, technical barriers on trade, public procurement, the question of mode 4, giving access for service people coming from India to the European Union, IPR issues, security of data. So there are a lot of controversial issues, but nevertheless, I'm totally convinced that we need a comprehensive agreement. So all elements fit in, and it's of course give and take in the whole picture. And we were able to conclude such comprehensive agreements with Canada, with Japan, and as Markus Bayer mentioned, also with Mercosur, and hopefully we can get some further commitments in specific areas from the Mercosur side so that we can start the ratification process soon. And the further commitments are related to the sustainability, the question of labor rights, environmental protection, the Amazon region, and the burning of the Amazon forest. So this should be added with some implementation monitoring and enforcement mechanism. So the TSD is, of course, the sustainability in trade is, of course, a key element for trade policy in the European Parliament, and we have a very close eye on that. So 4 elements where I think we could really have a dialogue. And of course, I'm convinced that it's not an easy task to find common solution for that. But in this challenging time, I'm convinced that we should try, and perhaps another try. As I told you, I am coming just from the Brexit negotiation, and this is also the history of the Brexit negotiation, that we are trying day by day, once again, not losing our patience, so that at the end of the day, there might be a good outcome. And I hope that this high-level dialogue, I think also mentioning the EU-India summit in January, in 2021, will be a forum to discuss it. And I hope the second forum will be also the parliaments of both sides, the European Parliament and the Parliament of India, as we did it also in the parliamentarian conference of the WTO. Perhaps we can also organize more cooperative work so that we can perhaps push on these 4 items as well to get a solution soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Lange. I think that you're in the middle of the negotiation. We're fortunate to have had you able to pull the time out for this conference. For everybody's knowledge, I'd like to tell you that about 6,000 people have registered for this session. And with that, I'd like to, I take great pleasure in introducing our Minister of State for Commerce, Industry, Civil Aviation, Housing and Urban Affairs, Mr. Hardeep Singh Puri. Mr. Puri's had a stellar career, and he's nowhere near done with it yet. He was the ambassador and permanent representative of India to the United Nations in New York from 2009 to 13. He's also been the head of the Indian delegation to the UN Security Council. He's been the president of the governing body and chairman, president of the governing body and chairman of the governing council of the Research and Information System for Developing Countries. Currently, Union Minister independent in charge of Housing and Urban Affairs and Civil Aviation, and also the Union Minister of State for Commerce and Industry. So with that, I'll give the floor to Mr. Hardeep Singh Puri. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Atul. I presume I'm audible. If not, one of you please signal and I shall thank you. Let me start by saying how pleased I am to be participating in this global platform in such distinguished company. And now you tell me that apart from the expertise which we have on the screen, the professional experience, you're also joined, you said, by 6,000 people who are linked to this program. So clearly they are going to be taking very careful note of what is being said today. And I will try in the time that you have given me to put forward some ideas where I think we have complete convergence in terms of our thought processes with the European Union. The desire for a rule-based multilateral trading system, the desire to strengthen the India-EU economic and trade partnership, and to jointly navigate the way forward from the somewhat unprecedented and very difficult circumstances and unusual circumstances that we find ourselves in. But before I comment on some of those things, let me start by saying, Mr. Chairman, that I want to be on record to congratulate the Confederation of Indian Industry for completing 125 years. I've had an association with the CII almost recalling most of my diplomatic career. I was a young staff officer to the Foreign Secretary even before that, when I used to interact with people like Tarun, Dada and others in diplomatic, and I always regard myself in some ways as part of the larger CII family, as do most Indian ambassadors. So congratulations. It's been a long, eventful, productive and prosperous journey, and I'm glad that insofar as the umbilical tie-up between India and the EU is concerned, it is the CII which is hosting this framework. Relations between India and the EU go back to the 1960s. Most of us have been students of this integration process. The coal and steel communities, the first 6 countries, and now the expansion and the integration which has taken place in so many areas, maybe not as fervently as some of us had hoped, even on common foreign and security policy, but that's a matter for you to determine. But today, the EU is engaged, as you said, Mr. Chairman, and as our previous speaker mentioned, in somewhat sui generis, if I may use the word, negotiations relating to Brexit. And if you look back at the history of the European, first of all, the European coal and steel community and how it expanded and where it has reached now, the outcome of these negotiations, I think, will be important not only for the European Union, for the United Kingdom, but also for India's relations with Europe. I think Europe and India have built successful economic and commercial ties over the years based on shared interests, the principles of democracy, the rule of law, and diversity. We in India have been undergoing rapid and transformative change. The pandemic, I was ambassador to the UN in Geneva, PR. I was in New York. We've dealt with pandemics in the past. We've had experience of SARS, Ebola, H1N1. But I think COVID-19 is in a class apart. Just now in India, we're doing a CFR or a case fatality ratio of less than 1.4%. We are testing millions of people. Our positivity rate is only 2%. But somehow the disruption which COVID-19 has caused reminds us back to the days when we had to face the Spanish flu. And I believe that we are not out of it yet, but maybe there is a streak of optimism because the talk of the vaccine is in the air. It has been introduced in some parts of the world or is on the verge of being introduced. So we are hoping to end this rather difficult year, 2020, with a new sense of resolve, determination, and optimism, so that in 2021, in all our endeavors, whether they are bilateral, plurilateral, or multilateral economic and trade ties, or my portfolios dealing with civil aviation, we can be back to pre-COVID levels, and I'll come to that in a minute. All I want to say is that insofar as our political framework which binds us together, I'm very happy that recently we renewed the agreement on scientific and technological cooperation for the next 5 years to expand cooperation, scientific research and technology, which will significantly benefit both sides through providing affordable healthcare, clean energy, food processing, biotechnology, green transport, and e-mobility. The Indian government's Digital India initiative is transforming the Indian economy into a digitally empowered society. The rapid growth of internet manufacturing, internet users in the country, expanding digital payments, digitalization of manufacturing are growing dimensions of this economy. On the other hand, the EU's flagship initiative, Digital Single Market, aims to facilitate seamless access to online activities for all while providing fair competition and data protection. The two sides' flagship initiatives and digital efforts present ample scope for enhanced cooperation, including in areas such as cybersecurity, ICT standardization, research, and innovation. One thing that the pandemic has taught us, once the history of this period is written, when we have drawn the lessons and we navigate our way forward, is that we must maintain flexibility and not become overly dependent on any one or one set of sources in the supply chain. Because this experience has taught us that we can diversify and that there are things we can do ourselves. But in this context, I want to reach out to my friends in Europe that our Atmanirbharta, or the self-reliance initiative of the Prime Minister, is designed not to be inward looking. It is designed in order to be able to ensure that we are able to take our position in the international community with a new sense of confidence. It is not just a vision, it is a well-planned economic strategy that brings to the table returns with reality, demand with democracy, stability with sustainability, and growth with a green approach. I heard one of the distinguished previous speaker talking in terms of the multilateral trading system, talking in terms of somehow integrating the 2030 agenda or the sustainable development goals into the overall framework of our multilateral effort. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share with you personally that I started my professional life and spent many years dealing with the multilateral system. I spent the first part of my career as a young first secretary as a member of the Indian delegation on the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which was a predecessor instrument of the World Trade Organization. I was around doing a UNDP funded project for technical assistance for developing countries when the Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiations was taking place and the WTO took shape. I ended up then as ambassador in Geneva. I ended up thereafter as permanent representative in New York. So I've been around with the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, and now I can tell you with confidence that in India, we take the Sustainable Development Goals very seriously. They actually reflect the essential core philosophy of the Modi government. When the 2030 agenda says to the farthest first, that represents the Indian philosophy from Sarvodaya to Antyodaya. That is, we need to reach out to the poorest segments and the most vulnerable segments of our society first. And I believe that is what the multilateral trading system is in essence. Even if you look at the preamble of the GATT, I'm talking about the GATT 1947, or you look at the preamble of the World Trade Organization, in the core is the objective of raising the standards of living of all the people through mutually beneficial trade concessions and other economic arrangements that we were in. So I would be surprised, maybe in the past we were able to do trade negotiations without a sensitivity on how they would impact on the vulnerable sections within countries. So there was a little bit of a disconnect between countries. There was a perception that some countries gained more than others, and within countries there were discrepancies or disparities. I am unashamedly a total supporter of an open, free and rule-based multilateral trading system. And I totally agree with those speakers who, referring to it in the past, said if the multilateral trading system were not to exist, we would be vulnerable to the actions of those who are large economies or dominant economies. But more than that, maybe we can, Europe used to represent 45% of global trade when I was a negotiator. I don't know what the figure is now, but maybe more, maybe less. But it's a very powerful economic entity. Maybe Europe will be able to look after itself. I have no doubt we are a growing economy, we are a fast-growing economy. We were $2.89 trillion prior to COVID. I'm sure we will be a $5 trillion economy by 2024 or 2025. And God willing, a $10 trillion economy when the Sustainable Development Goals complete the work by the year 2030. But if you don't have a multilateral trading system and you don't have the rule of law, then I suspect everyone, including the dominant players, would find themselves facing anarchy and the law of the jungle. So I think a multilateral trading system is good, not only for the weaker trading partners, but it is also very important for even for those who currently think that they are in a dominant position. Well, there is something about multilateral economic processes. It's not always linear that some countries become richer and richer. The political and economic geography has a propensity to change, and I think trade and economic interaction based on rules of law will give us that opportunity. I heard one of the previous speakers say that we have not always agreed. Well, maybe that's normal when you're dealing with two robust global centers which are democratic to the core. Well, India is. We have very strong democratic tradition. People talk about the Magna Carta and the start of democracy in the West. You know, I'm a student of history, and I said we had republics in India in the 6th century BC. When a Greek traveler came to India in 302 BC, Megasthenes, he wrote a book called Indica, where he talks about the existence of republic. So I'm afraid democracy is part of our blood. Of course, it was enhanced in the interaction that we had over an extended period of time with Europe. But I can tell you, we regard Europe and the European Union as natural partners with whom we can do business. Therefore, we want to have a more open, enabling environment for your economic entities here, and we hope we can do the same. We would be very happy if you were to resolve your bilateral problems with the United Kingdom, because when I deal with them, they are carrying forward, still holding some of your trade policies when we find that we are not able to do it till they fashion their own policy. But this is not the place to talk about it. I want to say one or two things on the SDGs and our cooperation, and then I would like to conclude, because I think most of us have enjoyed this, and maybe we're running a few minutes ahead, but I have a pretty punishing sort of a schedule after this. Let me just say three things. One is that the SDGs will succeed, and I want to go back. The Millennium Development Goals succeeded largely because a large developing country called China. You may have your doubts whether China is a developing country or not. That's a separate discussion. But the MDGs, or the Millennium Development Goals, succeeded because China succeeded in lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty with a little help from other countries like India. But when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals, these will succeed because India will succeed. And I think the specific initiatives which we've taken, including the PLI scheme, which we have recently introduced, it will help revive the dynamism of some of our sectors so that we are able to compete in a more focused manner as a responsible member of the international community. All these opportunities, all the actions that we are taking, the initiatives we are taking, all these provide ample scope for expanding the Indo-EU strategic partnership, which will be carried forward in the coming years through dialogue and high-level interaction. I heard my young friend, I hope he doesn't think I'm being patronizing, but my colleague Rahul Chhabra, who's now secretary to the government, but you know, he and I worked together many years. We were younger officers, and compared to me, still young. You know, he talked in terms of doing things which will enable us to bring positives onto the platform. He talked about, I think, how many out of the 9 virtual summits that have been held, large number with the EU. I don't know how to put it, but no matter which sphere of our economic activity we look at, whether it's the trade front, whether it's investments, whether it's technology, I have very long notes. If I'd read them out, you would be here for another hour. Defense cooperation, our specific defense ties with individual European countries or with number of European countries joining in products. I mean, it's massive. Therefore, I think not only in terms of the political summit level interaction, but every other place, what we are taking initiatives on today provide ample scope for win-win derivatives of in-win flow from there for the India-EU front, strategic partnership, through dialogue and high-level interaction. I want to make the specific point that we hope to restart negotiations on an Indo-EU free trade agreement, bilateral trade and investment agreement. I heard one of your distinguished speakers say, we've been at it for a long time. Then he drew a comparison with what happened with Mercosur. You took a long time there as well. Well, if you take time, I was ambassador to Brazil, and we have a agreement with Mercosur also. It's a limited agreement, not particularly ambitious, but I think given the changes that we are all finding ourselves in today, an India-EU enhanced economic partnership, a bilateral trade and investment agreement, a free trade agreement, intensive work towards that, but more important, even to get an early harvest or a stepping stone towards that comprehensive agreement. These are issues on which I think we should commit ourselves, and I'm certainly willing, as part of my one of my portfolios to make that recommendation on the commerce and industry front for us to move ahead. I think this is the time to be in India and the time for you to expand your investments in India. We welcome you, and I will always be ready to assist you through all means at our disposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hardeep Singh ji. You've really given us a lot of food for thought, and I think there's a lot of commonality on this panel that the need to get these agreements in place at the earliest is there. So I think with your encouragement, I think we will all be pushing for these to start getting some more traction. Do you have time for a couple of questions, Hardeep Singh ji? Okay. So I think one of the points that you already covered was the fact that we look for smaller deals on sectors that do not have contentious issues, and we can build the bilateral agreements around those. So you've already touched.
Atul, I don't know whether I'm audible or whether somebody muted me. Am I audible?
Yes, you are now.
Okay. No, Chair, I'm very clear that the changes that we have witnessed in the global scenario, in the regional scenario, an intensification of the India-EU partnership becomes an even higher imperative. I don't want to get into a reason of why we have taken so long or what those hesitations were. Well, you know, I think I come from a breed of people, among a breed of people who believe in pragmatically, whatever we can get agreement on, let's put that into an early harvest. There are some sectors on which there is no difference of opinion. Let's not wait for the entire package to fall in place so that you want to be very ambitious. So let's start immediately by putting those little building blocks, if I may use that term, on the table, those sectors which are doable, and put them in the ribbon of a early harvest, which will be a stepping stone towards a more ambitious free trade agreement. And I think Article 24 of the erstwhile GATT must be the same article in WTO, allows that. And I'm willing to have a discussion with anyone on the European side on the compatibility, the legal and the procedural compatibility of that. So I'm very happy for us to go along on that.
Okay, that's good to hear. So this is a question to our European friends, that the EU can take advantage of the Atmanirbhar program and move its supply chains from China to India. How do European SMEs view this opportunity that India offers? I'll leave that open to anybody who would care to answer. Mr. Lange, Mr. Behrer.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a decision by the companies how they build their supply chain. Huh? Of course, there are some problems we are faced with due to the pandemic shock and the disruption in some supply chain. But of course, we have also supply chains which are a little bit unstable to other countries worldwide. So this is a big task for the next year, to create a trade policy which makes supply chain more resilient. And of course, reshuttling, reshoring will be also part of the game, and we have to discuss it quite carefully how we really end with a resilient and of course also fair supply chain. And we are discussing, for example, due diligence legislation to make supply chain more stable.
Mr. Behrer, I think just to build on that, there's a lot of concern that a lot of European companies had their supply chains from China. India is offering a very robust platform now to shift some of those supply chains or become an alternative to the Chinese option as well. Do you feel that there's anything more that India can do to help this process further along?
I mean, I think, and I stressed it a bit, we have this debate in Europe now. I mean, the crisis has shown us that we are very dependent on certain regions of the world. And this is what this whole debate on strategic autonomy is about. Our belief is it must not in any case lead to an inward-looking Europe. And our belief is the best way to make supply chains more resilient is to diversify. And I think I've stressed it in my statement, and I would see a specific opportunity for India here to be part of these diversification strategies. In order to achieve this, and I also stressed it in my statement, and you have also mentioned SMEs, and this is even more important for SMEs. Of course, companies, and we know it's not only trade, it's very much about investment. There needs to be security and certainty. So one of the very important building blocks would, of course, be to be successful in a bilateral investment agreement and to protect investment. And as I've stressed, the moving away of the bilateral agreements has hurt some investors, and of course, to be able to do this between you and India would be one of the major building blocks. And last but not least, on SMEs, we have discussed this last year in this Global Business Coalition. This is a key story, and given the basis that we achieved, the necessary steps forward in our bilateral relationship, I mean, I think there's great opportunities for SMEs as well, of course.
Ms. Koenig, you had a point?
Yes, thank you. And of course, I agree very much with what the previous speaker said. Of course, in the end, it's a decision by business. But I think also on a more political level, it is our responsibility to see how we can put the framework which makes those decisions more easier. So companies really can trust that what they're building up is a resilience and a sustainable value chain wherever they go. So I think that is one of the areas where I think there is a lot of interest on both sides that we should take forward in starting in the high-level dialogue in January. Thank you.
Mr. Hitti, you had something to add?
All participants stressed out that it's mainly a question of the companies, how they act, and that on the other hand, it's important what framework they are working in. And as a national parliamentarian, I see that next to the EU-India agreements, there are also points where Germany and India can push forward. I mentioned in the beginning the Indo-German governmental consultations. So in my time as a parliamentary state secretary in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, we signed a fast-track agreement between India and Germany, which supports Indian companies in Germany to get problems solved in our administration, and vice versa. We have an agreement, a fast-track agreement with India that German companies support when they have problems with administrations in India. I think that's a small point. On the other hand, you need to see that we talk about trades and services. But at the very end, business is made by people, and you need to bring people together. And since this year, we have a new migration law in Germany, what it makes much easier for Indian people to come into Germany. So due to COVID-19, it was quite difficult this year to travel between our two countries. But I think in the future that is to come, we will see a much more movement of people between our two countries, and we should foster it also on a national agenda. But on the other hand, I think it's very, very important that the European level is working with India, especially on the mentioned FTA and investment protection agreement. It's very important for the companies when it comes not only to trade, but for investments in India or in Germany. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hitte. I think we're fresh out of time. We're exactly at our close. Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, for having taken the time out and giving us your points of view. I think, Mr. Chhabra, you've laid out a good roadmap for him to do the early harvesting so that businesses on both sides can really take advantage of the opportunities that are presenting themselves now. Thank you all on the panel for a very lively discussion. I wish we had more time to engage, but I think time is against us, literally. once again, on behalf of CII, I thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.